Today, we're in Chicago. No, not Wrigleyville, or the beautiful Loop, or in the fancy brownstone districts of Lincoln Park or Bucktown. We're on the city's gritty and salt of the earth, old southwest side, one of the oldest and most authentic areas of the city. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Project Gaia. JP here, and today we are in Chicago's old southwest side neighborhood, right? So it's really more of a region. We're gonna explore 5 different neighborhoods. Those are Chinatown, Bridgeport, Canaryville, McKinley Park, and back at the Yards. Now, I love these areas because they are the authentic Chicago. So this is what you think of when you think of the real Chicago. So this is on the south side. A lot of people are scared to come here. I don't know why though. It is an area that is filled with interesting neighborhoods, real salt of the earth people, and it has some of the city's oldest architecture. So this is one of the oldest areas of the city. Most of the structures here were built in about 1880 to 1900. There's even some as old as 1870. So it is a very old Chicago neighborhood. I mean, it has that old block feel, close together houses, 3-4 story apartment buildings, little old gangways, people playing on the street. It really is one of my most favorite areas of the city. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you that the south side of Chicago isn't all bad, and that this is a destination to visit, and why. And we're going to explore the area. We're going to have some good food. We're going to see some very old architecture, and we're going to just see what makes this such a crucial part of the city of Chicago's heritage. So let's begin. So the first place that you have to check out when you're in Chicago's old southwest side is Chinatown. Now, Chinatown is a great community. It really caters toward the Chinese immigrant population. I mean, the signs are in Chinese, even the subway or L stop is called Cermak Chinatown, right? So it's actually a really quick journey from downtown Chicago. So from the Loop, it's about a 10 to 15 minute train ride and drops you off right here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna explore Chinatown a little bit. It has a lot of cool, funky stores, a lot of good restaurants, and it is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. It wasn't always Chinese. The Chinese population started to grow in Chicago in the beginning of the 20th century, and before that it was mostly an Italian neighborhood. But right now it's completely Chinese, and it has a lot of cool, interesting, and unique stores and some of the city's oldest architecture. So let's start. Chicago's Chinatown is an old and mysterious neighborhood burgeoning with Chinese culture. It is one of the city's most homogeneous ethnic neighborhoods and has a unique aura and vibe. Make sure you stop into Legend Tasty House for the rolled ice cream. They smear the cream onto a cold table and then scrape it off. That all sounded kind of gross, but it creates a very tasty texture of the ice cream. Make sure you step into some of the traditional Chinese markets around Chinatown. They're very interesting, have lots of different kinds of seafood, and you're sure to be amazed by all the different Chinese products they have. Also, hop into all of the Chinese-themed stores. These quirky commercial establishments encapsulate the fun of wandering through this ethnic neighborhood. Here you can find traditional Chinese products, spiritual items, and a lot of merchandise for kids. It's also a great place to get a unique souvenir for your visit to Chicago. Okay, the next place you have to visit is Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood. So this is one of the, if not the, oldest neighborhood in the south side of Chicago. So it is a very close-knit neighborhood. There have been people living here for generations that have remained. So this neighborhood, interestingly, has not fallen prey to white flight or suburbanization like a lot of the south side has. So you have just many generations living in these apartment buildings with each other, and you know, a lot have their own houses, and it's very, very close-knit neighborhood. This is also the home of the Chicago White Sox. So if you come to a White Sox game, this is where you're going to come. And if you haven't noticed already, I got my Southside shirt on, and there is an intense pride in being from the South Side around here, and on the South Side in general, because, you know, it kind of, living on the South Side, you feel separated from the rest of the city. It's kind of like Chicago's evil stepchild in a way. So the area has created this extreme pride, and you will see that everywhere you go. I mean, you'll see White Sox stuff everywhere, and the reason they kind of use White Sox is because it is a big sports city, and secondly because the White Sox represent not just Chicago but the south side of Chicago, and you're probably going to see that in Bridgeport the most. Now it is a beautiful neighborhood filled with some of the most historic brownstones in the city, and it is a great place for a summer night. I mean, we're here during the week, during the day, but you come here on like a Friday summer night. We're here in July, so if you came a little later, you would see tons of people hanging out on the stoop. Lots of people know each other, and it really is a very good vibe. So I definitely recommend, when you're in Chicago, to come down here, explore the neighborhood a little bit, and go to a White Sox game. Simply walking through Bridgeport is a treat because it is one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, and it has some of the most interesting architecture. Bridgeport is often considered the epitome of an old South Side Chicago neighborhood. It is in this area that the Chicago accent is one of the thickest in the city, and its long history and generations of residents give it a unique and homey vibe. It is characterized by neat and tidy 3-flat apartment buildings, some single-family homes, nice scenery, and an intense and loving South Side pride and tradition. Bridgeport is mostly known as an Irish, Italian, and Croatian neighborhood, but there are various others such as Polish, German, Mexican, and a lot of Chinatowns actually creeping into Bridgeport as well. And the businesses reflect those cultures, so definitely check in to some of the restaurants. So a bit of Chicago history here. If you could see behind me, there are 2 buildings on the same lot. So I'm gonna get out of the shot a little bit. This is the main apartment building, and this is called the Coach House. So you're gonna see this a lot on the old Southwest side. You got to remember, in this time, neighborhoods were incredibly dense, especially this neighborhood. It was probably about 3 times more dense than it is now. So people didn't have cars, right? So people didn't have cars, and they had to live really close together because they had to usually walk or take like a bus or a streetcar to work. So you don't see the sprawl like you do in newer neighborhoods. So in these older neighborhoods, you see really close together structures. And you will see this a lot. Most of them are not this setup, but it is something you do see, where the entire lot is taken up by development. There's a little piece in the middle, like a middle yard. And usually, you know, extended family lived in these, or even servants, if it was a wealthier family. This wasn't too wealthy of a neighborhood. This was more of a working class neighborhood. So it probably was like an extended family. And like I said, you will see multi-generational people living in the same building on the old Southwest side. Not as much as it was in the past, but even until today. So one place that you have to check out when you're here in the Bridgeport area of Chicago's old Southwest side is Rickaboni's. Now this restaurant has been here since 1946, so it's several decades years old, and it's become a Chicago classic. So what's so great about it? So they have tons of food, and you know, I encourage you to try other things. But what they're known for is their breaded steak sandwich. Now this is a uniquely Chicago dish, and this is arguably the best place to get it. So what it is it's like a fillet of steak, fried and battered inside of a bun with like tomato sauce and a little bit of cheese on it, and then you could add other stuff as well. But it is phenomenal. This is where we're gonna have lunch. So let's head in. Okay, so we got our breaded steak sandwich, and may I say, it looks phenomenal. So it's got that breaded steak with the mozzarella cheese and all the good marinara sauce. I mean, it really is a tasty thing. So let's, sloppy though. So, you know, you may need a knife and fork if you're a novice, but I just use my hands. So good. I love the breaded steak sandwich from Rickaboni's. Definitely a must-do when you're here in Bridgeport, for sure. Now, one place you must visit when you're here on the old Southwest side and in Bridgeport in general is White Sox Park. It's now called Guaranteed Rate Field. Makes me cringe because any real Chicagoan that's a little bit older will call it Comiskey Park, because it was called Comiskey Park for a very, very long time, since the beginning of its founding, really. Now, this isn't the original White Sox Stadium. The original White Sox Stadium was the oldest ballpark in America. It was torn down in like 1990, 1991, and it is where the North parking lot is now. Anyway, the White Sox won the World Series in 1906, 1917, and 2005. So it's a big thing of pride here on the south side of Chicago, and you definitely should check out a game. I mean, they're not as big as they used to be, and you do get a lot of fair weather fans, so like when they're doing well, the stadium could be completely full, and then when they're not doing well, it could be pretty empty. But it is a really nice modern stadium because it's only about 30 or so years old. But definitely check this out when you're here. They are not playing today. Tomorrow, so maybe we'll come back here tomorrow, but definitely check this out when you're here, and you get fantastic views of the Chicago skyline from the top of the stadium. So something that you'll notice when you're walking around the old Southwest side of Chicago is that a lot of the buildings are actually pushed back, and you're kind of elevated on the sidewalk. And why is that? So in the 1850s and 1860s, the city didn't have a sewage system, right? So the buildings were kind of like in the mud, and there was like a lot of outbreaks of cholera and other waterborne bacteria diseases, right? So the city invested a massive effort to actually raise the ground levels of the streets of many of these old neighborhoods. So you'll notice when you walk around that sometimes you're like 4 to 10 feet elevated above the lots to your left, the lot lines, right? And that is because at one point the street level was lower. It was 4 to 10 feet lower. So you're kind of elevated as you go along, and that's the reason why, because you are standing on the raised part, so you're standing where they built the sewer, and the actual ground line is down there. So we are now at the far northwestern reach of the Bridgeport neighborhood. Now, behind me is this body of water. This is the Chicago River, the south branch of the Chicago River, which flows into something called the Illinois and Michigan Sanitary Canal. Now, it looks bleak and drab and gritty because it is, even to this day. So what this was it was a major employer for immigrants in the late 19th century and early 20th century. So they connected basically through this canal the Chicago River to the Illinois River, to the Mississippi, down to the ocean. So it was an incredible engineering feat, and it was at the hands of thousands and thousands of immigrants, mostly Irish immigrants. So this neighborhood around here is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and you'll see some of the oldest housing in the city. And if you're Irish and in Chicago, particularly from the south side Irish of Chicago, you more than likely have roots in this neighborhood, because this is where all the Irish came to work. When they came from Ireland, they came to this area and they worked to build this canal. And it's other immigrant groups as well, but a large percentage of them were the Irish. So it's pretty interesting. It's a bit of local history, and it really explains some of Chicago's strategic geographic location, contributing to how it grew so fast and became one of the world cities in the world, and in the second largest city in America. When you're in West Bridgeport, also make sure to check out the Bridgeport Art Center. This is basically a big warehouse that was turned into an art gallery, and they have tons of events. So right behind the Bridgeport Art Center is a body of water known as Bubbly Creek. This is also the place where you could rent kayaks, but I don't know if I'd really want a kayak on this river. Anyways, it's a small branch of the Chicago River that comes off of the Chicago River, kind of close to where we were by the Illinois, Michigan, and Sanitary Canal. Anyways, this area of Chicago for centuries has been very industrial. Soon we're gonna go to the old Stockyards. So that was the largest meatpacking plant in the United States several decades ago. And there was so much pollution on this river. So much pollution, so much throwing of dead bodies and carcasses of the animals, that there is like this permanent methane gas below the water. And I mean, I could imagine like thousands of like cow and horse carcasses and bones. So anyways, what's interesting about it is it bubbles to this day. It's called Bubbly Creek. So if you look really closely, you can still see it bubbling. Now the Union Stockyards closed in the 1970s, so it's been 50 years since they've been open, and it's just so interesting to me that the river here still bubbles from the pollution from that time. Where we are now is the entrance to the famous Union Stockyards. Now, this was a major employer of immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, this is basically a big industrial park, and this was an area where the meatpacking of the entire United States took place in these early days. So it wouldn't be uncommon to see thousands of cattle and horses in here, and actual cowboys, and it employed a lot of immigrants. So Irish immigrants, Polish, Lithuanian, Italian, and many more. And this gives rise to the name Backyards, which is another neighborhood we're going to later. So what's fascinating about this is this was the beginning of food regulation in the United States. So if you ever read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, that is about this very location. So an investigative reporter went into these factories, basically these meatpacking plants in the early 1900s, and reported the processing of meat and how unsanitary it was, and how it wasn't regulated, and it was just waste all over the place and very unhealthy and very unsanitary, and it led to a lot of disease. So this book and this area was the founding of the USDA, which was kind of the first regulatory commission for food in the United States. The next neighborhood that we're going to see is Canaryville. Now, this is just south of Bridgeport and just east of the Stockyards. Now, this is a historically Irish neighborhood. Kind of think South Boston. So it has like kind of a gritty, old Irish charm to it. And what's interesting about it is mostly frame houses and apartment buildings, not brick, like you saw at Bridgeport. And the reason for that is because Canaryville actually at the time was not part of Chicago. It was annexed later after most of the buildings were built. So after the Great Chicago Fire in the 1870s, the city required all buildings to be built with brick unless they were grandfathered in. So Canaryville was actually not in Chicago at the time. It was annexed later. So you're gonna see a difference in architecture. And it's a charming neighborhood and it has a strong Irish culture to it. So let's take a look. Canaryville is one of Chicago's oldest neighborhoods. This area is characterized mostly by frame housing that dates back to the late 1800s to early 1900s. The neighborhood for decades has retained an authentic Irish charm, and its working-class salt-of-the-earth vibe is present all around. Canaryvillers pride themselves on their local Catholic church and school, St. Gabe's. So the neighborhood we're in now is Chicago's famous Back of the Yards. So Back of the Yards was always considered a rougher neighborhood, and this was the epicenter of where the poorest immigrants in the city moved to, and they were employed in the stockyards that we saw earlier. So you're gonna see really dense housing, a little bit dilapidated. I mean, the neighborhood for a lot of its history was considered kind of a Polish neighborhood until about the 70s or 80s, and then it started to switch to a Hispanic neighborhood, which it continues to today. But I think it's a nice neighborhood. It just has old housing, and it's just a very kind of salt-of-the-mill, working class kind of neighborhood. And it's been like that since its founding, really. I mean, this was built to support the workers that works in the adjacent factories and meatpacking plants. So you're gonna kind of still feel that vibe. And what's really interesting about the Back of the Yards is you could still smell the meat. Now, the stockyards closed in the 1970s, right? So it's been 50 years, but the meat smell, there are some meatpacking plants still, but very little, but the meat smell is still in the air. And if you talk to an old Chicagoan from the south side, they will tell you that when the winds hit a certain way, you can smell the meat smell of the stockyards for miles and miles and miles. So it was a very polluted neighborhood, and it was a poor neighborhood, but it has a good spirit, and it really is a cool old neighborhood to see when you're here in Chicago's old southwest side. Chicago's famous Back of the Yards neighborhood was the first place of residence of thousands of immigrants when they first came to the United States to make a new life. They were often employed in the nearby stockyards and industrial warehouses and made this rough, gritty, and polluted area home. It's now a lively Hispanic community, and you can still smell the meat of the nearby stockyards. It's also the home of some of the oldest architecture and apartment buildings in the city, and some of the oldest and most beautiful churches. Now now we're in McKinley Park. So this neighborhood is just west of Bridgeport and just north of Back of the Yard. So it's in the northwest quadrant of the whole area we've been in today. Now this is an up and coming neighborhood. It's close to the city, right at the Ashland Orange Line stop. You can get into the loop in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But it's also a really interesting old Chicago neighborhood. For most of its history, it was Irish and Italian, but in about the 80s, 70s, 80s, it started to switch Hispanic. So the neighborhood is about, I'd say 75% and 25% Irish, Italian, Polish, that kind of vibe. But it is a nice neighborhood, and its biggest feature is the McKinley Park. Now, McKinley Park is one of the largest parks in Chicago. It is beautiful. There's a lagoon, I mean, there's rolling hills, there's big old age trees, and it's right between all of these old neighborhoods. So it really is a nice place to relax, and you could really spend all day in McKinley Park, and we're gonna go in that as well. So, let's begin. McKinley Park is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Chicago and is one of the largest parks in Chicago. It is a playground for the old Southwest Side, and the park features a large lagoon, rolling hills, playgrounds, plazas, skating rinks, baseball diamonds, and more. Wandering around the park is a welcome meditation point on your big tour of Chicago's old Southwest Side. Okay guys, there you have it. This was Chicago's old Southwest Side. Now, a lot of tourists come to the city and they stay on the north side, they stay downtown, maybe the West Loop, and they don't really venture down here, and it really is a shame because this is the authentic part of the city. I mean, it's filled with different cultures. It really is the heartbeat of old Chicago, and it's the authentic Chicago. If you want to hear the Chicago accent, this is the place to come, right? So this is where the real people live, right? And it is filled with amazing restaurants and so many different cultures, and it really is a fantastic place to explore, and it's kind of off the beaten path when you come here to Chicago. Listen guys, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe if you haven't already. Like this video, share this video, leave me your comments below, or ask me any questions that you may have. Okay guys, until next time, take care, bye.